Welcome to the Criminal Litigation Series. My name is Omar Khudair. I'm a Senior Associate in Al-Tamimi's Litigation Department. I'm joined by Samir Kantaria, who's a partner and head of employment team. Today's crime we're discussing is disclosing confidential information. Disclosing confidential information in the context of employment is a criminal offense. It is protected by the cybercrimes law and the penal code. If an employee discloses confidential information of his employer, then he would be subject to a criminal offense. Now, with the use of technology, I think it's more common to see the cybercrime. So we see an employee sending an email with an attachment that has confidential information. This gives the employer the right to sue him and file a criminal case. Samir, what's your input on confidentiality and why is it important?
Well, confidentiality, of course, essentially where an employee works for an employer, the information that they gather during that period of service is actually critical to an organization and belongs to that organization. And we find quite regularly that where employees leave their employment, they do take some of that information along with them because they want to take that know-how with them when they go to their new employer. Now that of course creates problems because there's sensitive and critical information there, and as a result you find that employers are more willing these days to take action against an employee that's in breach of their obligations. One of the issues that a lot of employers find here is that unlike other jurisdictions like the UK, elsewhere, where you can apply for injunctive relief for employers to actually go in and stop the employee from disclosing that information, that remedy is not available here. And therefore, it then becomes more critical in terms of enforcement and how you protect your know-how.
Yes. So although it's operational by law and it's stated in the penal code and in the cybercrimes law, as we said, I think it's a common practice that you have to actually tailor it or explicitly say it in the employment contract. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we do end up tailoring clauses within employment contracts where we try and protect the employer to ensure that any taking of confidential information is essentially in breach of the contract and also the law as well. Now, quite commonly, one of the things that we get is an employer then wishing to pursue an action against an employee because they've taken confidential information. And that's where the support of the litigation team is vital and critical in order to see what options and what avenues we have in order to enforce that.
Yeah, when we get referrals from employment to file a criminal case against the employee, we don't really need that clauses from the employment contract because we can always refer to the law only. However, it does support to have this in place, and we do rely on it. Also, IT policies sometimes, or other policies within the company that states that this information is owned by the company, forms intellectual property, know-how, and cannot be used. Those are all helpful. I also find it more supportive to have like the disclaimer at the end of the email. It's not necessary, but it does give a red flag that you have this email is confidential and cannot be disclosed to anyone else. So part of the challenges that we face when dealing with this criminal offense is having a counter argument from the employee saying, well, yes, I did send it to my personal email, but it was to complete a task for the benefit of my employer. I didn't use it to my own benefit or the benefit of someone else. Quite vague and have some ambiguity, but we do find, and usually we find pieces of evidence that shows that he used it with competitors or other third parties, which makes it stronger. Now, in terms of experts and the use of technology, I know that we dealt with many experts now that have remarkable programs and applications that can extract information, get the red flags somehow using artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. What's your input on that?
Sure. So a lot of consultancy firms sort of use sort of latest technology whereby they essentially key in certain words, looking through, trawling through an individual's email account, which could go back, very, very sort of a long way back, and it may not just be a single individual. It could be a group of individuals. We had a situation recently where there was a group of 6 employees that went and set up their own company to essentially compete and essentially taking that confidential information. Now, to trawl through 6 email accounts to find when or where they'd taken confidential information became quite difficult. So we brought in one of the sort of investigative consulting firms, and they essentially sort of took that information, put it into their systems, and they could actually sort of pick out emails from there, which then allowed them to identify how it was done. Also, especially these days with the IT systems available, even though emails have been deleted off an individual's inbox or outbox, the server still retains
Can be retrieved.
Exactly, and can be retrieved from there. So whilst it is a more, I suppose, larger task in the end, it's become more efficient. Unlike the old days where you would almost have to go individually through emails and hope that you would actually find it. And I think that's sort of tied in with the advent of the cybercrimes law, in terms of not just emails being sent, but online, using the cloud to actually sort of upload information, which we have seen as well.
I think also there are like programs that can see or make a list of things that you print out. So if employees are printing excessive documents, it brings like an alert internally, and they have a copy of what was printed. Sometimes because the employee wants to go around this and take it as a physical copy, just to avoid any leads or evidence behind, so he prints it out. But I think this is also tackled. I think the final tips that we can give is, although it's operational by law, it should be there in the employment contract. You should have a disclaimer at the end of the email or any email communication. I think there should be a regular IT policy or a policy for that specific use of information that's circulated amongst the employees.
Yeah, I think, and look, this is becoming more of a prevalent issue in this market, not just this market, around the world. And with things being more competitive, employees are more keen to take that information because they want to show added value to their employer. Now, of course, the fact that an employee has taken information sort of becomes one of our key asks for an employer when they come to us to say, we have an employee leaving, we think they've taken information, and our first advice to them would be, do a sweep on your IT systems. Because if there is information that's been taken, then there are alternatives available apart from looking at just the compensatory element. Within the penal code, you're then within the realms of the cybercrimes law, which then in itself, the penal sanctions under that, be it a jail term and or a fine, are certainly more severe than what the penal code offers.
Yeah. Also, I think that part of it is awareness and education. So employees think this is my effort, this is my know-how. And that's why you find a lot of clauses in the employment contract saying, this is our know-how. Since you joined the company, anything prepared by you is owned by the company. And that's the idea. Although they don't really need to make that education, but it does mitigate the risks.
Yeah.
One last point is that the employer can further sue the employee through a civil action, apart from the criminal action, but we'll get this in another episode. All right. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, everyone. This brings the end to this episode discussing disclosure of confidential information. This is our first episode in the criminal litigation series. We look forward for you to join us in future episodes discussing different crimes.